People, what's going on? This is going to be a long lesson that's going to have 5 key points that I'm going to demonstrate throughout the course of this live stream. So, sorry, total brain freeze. The first thing I want to talk about when I'm introducing the idea of how to block in the fastest way possible is one of the most important points in doing that. Skip the details. So how do you do that when you're blocking in a portrait? If you look at the one that we have here in our source image, right? We've got a really great kind of 3/4 light source situation where the light is coming in from the upper right-hand side. That means that you have a lot of the face that is in light, and so it's full of kind of brightness and form, and a little bit of the face that's in shadow. Now, every time a portrait teacher talks to students about portraiture, they talk about how the head is essentially a kind of egg, right? So I'm actually going to start out with a pretty broad shape for the head that just gives us the vaguest inkling of what this head shape is going to be like. So once you have that, you think about where your light is coming from and try to consider what kind of shadow and light dynamic would be created by this. Now, naturally, I don't have to guess. We can look at this source image and say that there should be a shadow on this lower left-hand side, right? Then I should, of course, have the rest of the head more or less in light. Now, there will eventually be like a gradation in between light and shadow that runs through here, but the basic premise of the head being like an egg can be established exactly like this. So let's go ahead and block in our kind of mid-tone section. And I'm just going to go ahead and kind of smudge a little bit in between those two with my finger. I'm using a titanium white, so in fact, it's not really all that dangerous. And this is just a iron oxide based brown here, so not that big a deal. By the way, if you do have questions, just chuck them into the comments, and I'll get to them as the stream goes on. Also, by the way, like the stream, like the video, subscribe to the channel, etc., etc. I'm going to continue blocking the lights though, with a higher key value as we go to this far right-hand side, knowing that eventually I'm going to need to get all the way up to a pretty bright white. But with this, I more or less kind of have that egg shape in place. What was the first premise that I mentioned? Skip the detail. So I think you can say that effectively we have completely skipped the detail in this block in. Now that being said, it doesn't really look much like a face just yet, but that's going to come with time, and I'm going to show you how to kind of transition from this awkward egg shape into something that's a little bit more naturally human. The second point that I want to bring up, if we're trying to paint the fastest way that we possibly can, there is one really important stipulation, and it is use big brushes. None of your #1 rounds, none of your tiny filberts are really going to do. This one is maybe a little bit smaller than my index finger, and I think for the size of head that I'm making, if you want to block in quickly and efficiently, this is how I would do it, and this is the size brush I would use. So, coming back to this now, we need to make some concessions to the fact that this is a head. And the first thing that I'm going to do is start to indicate the eye sockets. Now, while I want to communicate the eye sockets, I don't want to do so in a way that compromises my leave out the details or kind of skip the details premise. So the first thing I'm doing is just kind of blocking them in as rather deep eye sockets. And I'm going to make a different value for each one on each side of the head, because I think that eventually the eye socket that's on the right-hand side, or is in the light shape, is in fact quite a bit lighter than the one that's over here in shadow. But let me just block this in a bit. And by the way, there's a couple of questions coming in, so I'll get to them while we're going. But yeah, someone asked me if I just added a new photo or source image pack to Patreon. I did. It's the female portrait pack, which has been available on Proco for a while, but I've just finally figured out how to deliver it on Patreon. And there's about 2,500 really, really high quality source images that I worked with a photographer to get. And that's available free to anybody who's a Patreon subscriber. So if you're looking for source images and you're already subscribed to my Patreon page, then you've got tons of them there waiting for you. Right. So I've got my eye sockets kind of blocked in, and I've used that kind of Van Dyke Z, that shape that goes under the brow here, down the nose, and down the bottom plane of the nose as well, to kind of establish the basic proportion of the face. And at this point, then I need to start to kind of surround the face, or at least make the overall kind of shape of the face more or less arrive. So I'm going to take some more mid-tone, and I'm going to start to kind of block in the shape of the hair and some of these shapes like around the jaw that should help to frame a little bit that light shape of the face. Now, the cool thing here is that because I'm using a relatively small amount of paint here, I should be able to just block my midtones over some of the lighter areas, kind of create that sort of light shape of the forehead through here. I should be able to create the shadows underneath the chin and jaw without much interruption. I think there's a thing in oil paint that people get wrong a lot, and it is kind of imagining that oil paint's really tricky, or that it's really like once you put it on, you can't change it afterwards. I find oil paint is really, really easy to manipulate. So if you want to, block in your whole canvas in a relatively light mid-tone, I don't think it's too hard actually to get through to the slightly darker values that you'll need eventually to arrive at the painting that you want. There's some other things about that sort of drying time and stuff and mediums you can use, but I'll save that for another conversation. Rick Urbanowski is asking, do you ever block in with charcoal? Sometimes I do. And, when I was a student, I found that to be really, really helpful because just the charcoal was a little bit easier to manipulate at that point. I had maybe some challenges in oil paint, some challenges. I wasn't so good at oil painting at the time, so it seemed really useful and really good to start to, create the proportions and indications of the figure by using charcoal. The funny thing about it, though, is that you have to be maybe a little bit precious with how you apply it, because if you get too much charcoal on the surface, it kind of becomes a bit of a pigment and it kind of mixes in with your paint. And if you're doing that in color, then it can be a bit, not advantageous. But overall, it's a totally good thing. Onyx Love says, the block-in looks like the man in the moon. Yeah. Well, that's how it is sometimes. Sometimes block-ins look wonky. But we'll save it. I'm not particularly worried about it. So let's go ahead and just add some of the more kind of distinct features of the face. So I'm going to trace down the edge of the jaw through here, down the chin, and underneath the jaw. And eventually, I want to go ahead and kind of block in the rest of the figure, kind of the rest of the canvas, really like everywhere that I want to paint. But I'm going to bring up now my next key point in how to block in really, really fast. And it's what you're seeing me do here. Use really bold values. When we think about skipping detail, sure, we can skip all the detail of the features of the face, but you can also skip details in terms of value, right? Like I'm choosing just a couple basic value groups to represent the entire light shape and the entire figure. I'm not too fussed about whether or not they are, let's say, accurate, or I don't even want to use that word at this point, because what I'm doing right now is kind of shooting for a ballpark of value. I'm trying to get in the neighborhood of the value that I want, and really no closer. any closer to that, any sort of fuss about getting perfect values. And I'm going to start to maybe kind of, I always use the phrase fall in love with, but I'm going to start to get attached to the thing that I'm painting. And right now I'm in this sort of zero detail, zero attachment space. And that's kind of where I want to stay. So I'm looking for average values to represent areas. Like the entire ear should just be like one, block of average value. And then you can surround that, of course, with some darker value, like the value of the hair around it, to kind of create that shape of the ear that eventually will create a sense of likeness. The earlier you get a kind of believable comparison, or let's say comparable looking painting, I think that the easier it is, or the earlier you're able actually to make kind of good comparisons and search for what we like to think of as likeness. So even now I'm trying to do that, trying to get a head on here that looks more or less like my model. Although that's filtered through a set of kind of simplification ideas. A good friend of mine always refers to this as the wig maker's block, right? So if you've ever walked by a shop that sort of sells wigs, what you'll see is that there's all these kind of mannequin heads that are displaying the wigs on top of them. And that's kind of the idea that we're getting to here, is that a wig maker's block doesn't have kind of any detail on it. It's just a generic block that is there to kind of hold the wig up. And I think it's fair to think of our block-ins kind of as that. Just generic blocks where there will eventually be a portrait. Rick Urbanowski says, is it just me or does that ear look unusually low? I don't know, Rick. Could be that the chin's unusually high. You kind of never know with these things. As I'm blocking in, of course, like the values are, or rather the shapes are evolving. So, you never really can tell too early if you have some, I always think of the ear as a kind of subtle placement. I kind of mess it up all the time. So to me, like, it feels very subtle. And if I do mess it up, I'm kind of not particularly surprised. I feel like that happens to me all the time. Despite the fact that I know it, despite the fact that I measure it and observe it and so on, like, I feel like I'm always getting ears wrong. But let's just keep going and see if it kind of resolves itself. Foster Pans says, how to be less frustrated during block-in with measuring. I think that the answer to that is really just to get good at measuring. By that I mean, I still get frustrated with measuring. I still get annoyed with it. I don't find measuring fun. It's the tedious part of painting and drawing, but if I don't do it, like, I kind of know what's going to happen. I'm going to have the Rick Urbanowskis of the world coming at me and going, hey, that ear looks really low. If you don't get it in the right place, it's not going to arrive there on its own. No offense, Rick. I do appreciate it. I love a good unsolicited critique on YouTube. I'm always happy to get them. Let's see. Jay Ladder says, are you looking at the reference photo life size or the same size as your painting? Thanks for all your lessons. You've helped my art journey immensely. My source photograph is never the size that I'm painting. For me, I think I live in that world where it's kind of comparative values, comparative measurements, and I stick to that ideal. So I don't really tend to go around searching for the same size. I think it can be helpful for students if it's possible to do. I just have kind of chosen maybe a slightly different path than that. Oh, Rick Urbanowski is following up. He meant unusually low ear on the model. That could be too. My own Muse by Cat says, do you prefer the detailed look achieved by paint blending or the bold brush strokes in optical blending? I think I love a bold brush stroke, as evidenced through this block-in style. I just think that boldness kind of encourages, here's my opinion coming through, boldness encourages an artistic voice to grow. Not that you can't do that when blending a lot, or that blending is somehow antithetical to developing a voice or a style. I think that there's this feeling that you can kind of blend away a lot of the real character in your painting, and I don't like to do that. I like a painting that just says what the artist wanted to say, and tries to do so boldly. So bold coming up again and again. Bold values. So we have values in the lights that are more or less unified together. There's a gradation that goes from lighter to darker. And then we have dark values here and here that are relatively in that dark mid-tone space. Eventually, this is one of the key points of blocking in fast that I think is really important, because it speaks to what's going to happen later, which is when you block in your midtones, what you're doing is saving space for the highlights and the darkest accents. Those are things that you want to have room to put into your painting at the end, because those are one way that you can really help yourself to kind of, how to put this? They're one way that you can help yourself direct the viewer's eye to where you want to go. So choosing dark accents in really important salient areas is great. And I think you give yourself the opportunity to make that decision once the full composition is blocked in, by blocking in bold values that are in a mid-tone range. Let's see. As this is developing, I noticed a couple things. One, there is a sort of disorganized group of hair along the left-hand side of the head here. I think that my job is going to be to interpret that, to try to make a cool version of that, rather than maybe trying to copy that shape verbatim. So I think I'm going to let that be actually darker than the value of the shadow on the cheek. So eventually, when I'm using my dark accent, I'm going to keep this value a little bit lighter. I'm going to let that one be a little bit darker. But I want to paint in the background around it before I move on. Now, when I paint the background, you're going to see me making these kind of chunky brush strokes. This is something that I feel is really useful when you're trying to design shapes. A good way to communicate a shape, which is, that's how we communicate in value on a canvas, is to let your brush do part of that work, meaning that your brush is organized to lay down a value in a shape, and that can be a part of your design language. If I'm swishing about and I'm blending around a lot, I'm kind of losing those distinct little shapes that my brush is making, and I feel like I'm losing out kind of on a design opportunity. So as I block in that background, I like it to look a bit chunky, and I like to emphasize and leave behind those clear brush strokes. Let's see, questions coming in. Do you have a favorite brand of oil paints? Oh, wait, sorry, there's a whole bunch of questions that I skipped. Rick Urbanowski says, you mentioned that because you're using titanium white, it's safe to smudge with your hand. Are most oil-based paints toxic? Plenty of them are. If you're using cadmium colors, for example, the cadmium is a heavy metal, not so cool, not the fun, cool kind of heavy metal that you can rock out to, more the heavy metal that kills you. So trying not to come in contact with those is very much ideal. What I'm using here is a titanium white. Titanium itself is relatively safe, and this is a sepia, like a warm sepia, which is a natural iron oxide pigment. So there again, relatively safe to work with. So I feel kind of okay smudging. If I was using lead white to paint, for example, and it was using, say, some really freaky, dark pigment, some phthalocyanine kind of blue or something, then I would be far less courageous smudging things around with my finger. Though, I do have to admit that sadly sometimes I succumb also to smudging even when I'm using lead white and stuff, which is really, really, really bad. Don't tell my wife. Um, I do think I maybe need to key up a little bit some of these lights. So I'm not going to go all the way up to white, but I want to establish a relatively light value here that'll be kind of close to white. Now, this is another space where I think that the getting rid of the details, and let me say that again. I think this is another moment where not painting details at first really, really helps you. When you need to make value changes, right? If you have only a few very simple shapes to kind of paint around, making your decision to kind of change values and actively doing that is really, really simple, right? Like I don't have a lot of detailed shapes that I need to paint around. I have just the boldest, simplest ones here, and I can change those values in kind of a heartbeat. So it is another way to like keep you efficient. Also taking into account that probably at the early stages of a painting, you're going to need to mess with your values a bit. You know, if you just block everything in the first time and like everything's perfect, you know, hey, I think that's great, but I'm not really like a member of that club. So I kind of need to have a process that allows me the space to kind of get around that a little bit. Yeah, I think I blocked in the values around the nose, maybe just slightly dark. So I'm going to lighten those up a bit now before anything else is happening in that area. And then in the eye socket too here, I can kind of bring in some of that light. As I said before, I'm like trying to be careful to kind of leave these brush strokes around, you know, not give in to that idea of, you know, kind of blending things out. If I do want to do something, I'll usually just sort of smudge something with my finger a bit so that it's kind of taking the edge off of something so it's not so dramatic. Like the kind of hardness of the edge or whatever. Eventually, I think it's a kind of cool little feature too that you see sometimes, these little like fingerprints, you know, flicking around in the painting that I'm making. Right, more questions coming in. Let's see. Eric Arneson says, "Love these Saturday streams. Thank you, Stephen." Hey, man, happy to do it. I think it's just a good way to kind of stay active myself, kind of stay in touch with everybody on YouTube, and keep generating good teaching content. I think, you know, teaching as well, not to say anything of painting, but like teaching is also a lot about kind of staying in practice and kind of staying in touch with what the popular ideas and popular kind of notions are. I think sometimes, yeah, like I treasure so much going back and visiting ateliers because, you know, there are these kind of hotbeds of opinion making and kind of testing for ideas, and how ideas work in a real life kind of drawing and painting scenario. So I'd love to stay in touch with those things. I think live streams are one good way to do that as well. Just to stay, you know, sharp and on your teaching game. Oh wow, my YouTube just crashed. That's super awesome. Let's see if I can get that back, because I can't see your comments right now. So sorry, everybody. Please bear with me. I need to jump back in, and I'm here. Fantastic. Right. Onyx Love says, "Do you have a favorite brand of oil paints?" Not really. I have colors that I like, but brands, I mean, it varies so much, you know, in terms of what a brand does with a particular color, and kind of how they produce that. I think if I had to, was forced, to say that I believe a little bit more in one brand over others, I would say that Old Holland, in general, tends to do pretty good. I see relatively infrequently a color from them that I don't like, or a color, a paint that performs badly, right? Although, full disclosure, I don't like their yellow ochre. I think their yellow ochre is weirdly, I think your yellow ochre is like one of the worst yellow ochres, which is crazy because like the rest of their colors are usually kind of so good. But they have this really, really kind of grainy yellow ochre that I don't like at all. All right. I think that I need to finish kind of framing the painting a bit, meaning that there's some of these areas, down here around her kind of jacket that I need to block in so that it can serve as a barrier, kind of a boundary for the background that I'm going to paint in there. And also kind of frame the light of the neck. Also, these are areas where, for those of you kind of engaged in oil paint, or in oil painting, these are places where you can stretch your legs a bit, try to develop a cool way to paint something like that. And I know it sounds kind of funny, right? Because we're all supposed to be these really uber serious fine artists that like don't use the word cool and stuff. But I think that more often than not, like I'm just kind of looking for a bit of an ad lib through here that looks cool, that doesn't kind of look lame. And usually it's some kind of slightly brushy solution. I wish I could make it sound more technical than that, but really we're just saying like, just find something a bit brushy that looks a bit cool and you'll be set. Now, back to the face. What's missing? The mouth is missing. The mouth is missing for a reason, because I'm more concerned with the muzzle form and all the values and transitions along the jaw than I am in that mouth in particular. When it comes time to paint the mouth, I'll simply paint it. I'm not going to kind of fuss around with it too much. But I am going to get into the features, specifically into the eyes, because I feel like now is the time to do that, since more or less the rest of it's blocked in. If I was doing this painting on my own, I'm not live streaming right now, I'd probably spend a little bit of time paint the background, just to get everything kind of locked in. But I feel like that's kind of dead air, and that is really going to bore you guys. M. Collins says, has working alongside Michael Klein changed how you approach painting in any way? Yeah, so Michael, I think, has never been in his life a perfectionist of any kind. And so, I have been. And so when I work with him and talk with him, sometimes I'm kind of shocked at the like stories from the other side, what it's like to not be a perfectionist. And yes, like when I'm painting, a lot of times I kind of, I jump into that headspace. I think like, all right, if I wasn't a perfectionist, how would I go about this? Like, what would I do here? I like to tell, my students, especially when we're doing stuff like heavy metal portrait drawing, which is a course I'm developing on Patreon. I like to tell them to kind of take a vacation from themselves, like who they think they are as an artist, and just kind of get into a totally different headspace. And that's very much what I do in that situation. Is I try to think, what would I do if I'd never been a perfectionist? How would I approach this? If I didn't have like a crippling case of perfectionism. So Michael's just been a cool way. Working with Michael has been kind of a cool way to, I don't know, broaden my perspective in terms of what it probably is actually like to not be a perfectionist. To watch him paint, is to kind of see that in action. I think he said something the other day that I think framed his position perfectly. He said, like, at a certain point, he just realized, this was his take, this is what he does, and then that's fine, that's all you can do, is you can just give your take. And if you kind of accept that, you're okay with that, then that's what you do. And I think in general, you'll paint better thinking that way than certainly than trying to, God forbid, to like make the perfect painting. That's such a counterproductive thought. Let's see. Somebody's asking, oh yeah, right, there's a couple questions. How long did you wait for the dried surface? I guess the surface of this, the imprimatura that I put onto the canvas, I usually let it dry for a couple days, and it's, very dry to the touch now. And then what am I working on? This is just a universal primed linen, and that has a little coat of oil paint on it. But I want to bring up, guys and girls, people, humans, I want to bring up the next really, really important point in how to block in fast. And it is, you need to fill the canvas. Fill the canvas as early as possible. Now, by that I mean, let's say, like, of course, maybe there's some blank areas up here, but I'm filling the context of the head that I intend to paint rapidly. This is because I would refer to this stage of the painting as the price of admission. You're not going to get anything done until this happens. So the faster you get the area that you intend to paint blocked in, the faster you can actually get to the job of refining the forms, finding the structure, searching for likeness, the things that I'm starting to do now, I couldn't do if I was still filling in the canvas around, if I hadn't gotten the whole painting blocked in. Oil paint works great, wet into wet, and what you want to do is find a way to give yourself the greatest amount of time to do the most efficient things that you can with oil paint. So get your context blocked in if you want to paint rapidly. Let's see, there's questions. Yeah, Elian is asking if we'll be able to watch these back. Yeah, this will just be a YouTube video. It's just on my channel. Rick Urbanowski asks, seems to me verbalizing your thought process while painting is a skill set on its own. This is precisely true. And in fact, before I ever started becoming a teacher online, I taught at the Florence Academy of Art for about 12 years. So by the time that I started making my first YouTube video, I'd been talking about drawing and painting for ages and ages and ages. And I think this is something that is one of those classic things where if you're benchmarking yourself based on kind of watching people around you, you look at, say, a YouTuber like me and you think, oh, gosh, he's so good at it. And that really sounded terrible, like I'm so good at it. I know I'm not bad at talking while painting. So let's say that you're observing that and thinking, oh yeah, how did that happen? Well, I've been talking for a living for probably a lot of my adult life. So it wouldn't be a coincidence that I am able to kind of verbalize what I'm doing relatively easily. Yeah, that sounded really bad. It sounded really like I'm really kind of full of myself. Definitely not, believe me. And Rick says, while simultaneously fielding unsolicited critiques, I love an unsolicited critique. Can't get enough of them. I learned very early on YouTube that YouTube live streams that people on YouTube, there's always like a person on a stream, and I know that of the people out there watching right now, I know there's one of you out there doing this who wants to say, well, that mouth looks a bit crooked, or oh, that nose is kind of in the wrong. Like, I know that you want to do it, and it's totally fine. I don't know why. I don't know what it is, but it's an instinct that some of us have, and it's totally fine. Maybe that person is destined to become a really great teacher someday. So who knows? But I have no issue with the YouTube live stream critiquers. Let's see. Faster Pan says, do you paint on linen? Yeah, I do. I mean, linen is just, it's an archivability thing. So if you're painting in oil and you want what you're painting to last, you don't want to paint on cotton. The reason is that, do you guys want to get boring? This is a really bad thing to say on a live stream. But if you want to get really boring and talk about it, the reason that you don't paint on cotton is because it is what is called hydroscopic, meaning that it responds to and absorbs a lot of water or moisture from the atmosphere. So if you're hydroscopic, it means that in a humid climate, that you will absorb a lot of water, and in a dry climate, then you will dry out. The effect that this has on your paint is think about like the paint as sort of laying in a thin layer on top of that substance, and the substance underneath is like expanding and contracting, expanding, contracting, expanding, contracting, expanding, contracting. And over time, that will destabilize your paint film. Linen is less hydroscopic, and so it is a better paint surface to work on. Super exciting live stream information coming in hot on painting on cotton. MJ Artwork is asking about my thoughts on Instagram right now. Instagram's hot garbage right now. Instagram's so bad right now for artists, and I think for a lot of people. My stance about being on social media, being anywhere, like YouTube's a kind of social media. But my whole stance about it is that if you can do what you really want to do and make content on that platform and be successful, then that's great. But if you need to like change what it is that you want to do to be popular on that platform, I think that you probably like shouldn't be on that platform, because I just don't think that's a sustainable idea, or a sustainable process. You need to enjoy the content that you make to make it consistently over time, because that's what it takes to be successful on a platform. So right now, like my personal feeling is like I don't think my values currently align with Instagram's values. So if I can avoid being there, I'm kind of going to avoid being there, because I don't think it's a super awesome place to be right now. Just my opinion. Juan Hernandez says, in your experience, what do you recommend to avoid physical pain such as eye strain or back pain? Oof. Not being a painter. It's a good start. Yeah, I think every painter, like I actually find that painting standing up is a bit I like it better for my body generally. At the end of a painting session, when I've been sitting down for like 2 hours, like I will after this one, I find that I'm much more exhausted than if I'm standing up. Or like it's a different kind of exhaustion. Like I might get tired from standing up, but at the same time I still feel like it's like a good tired. Like my body feels like it's been used, and I've run around and stuff, and I don't feel the kind of like aches that I do if I'm sitting down and painting like I'm doing now. Let's go ahead. Let's fill up the canvas, people. Let's fill it up. It's time. Now, I'm thinking that I want more or less like a darker kind of upper area in this canvas, and like kind of a lighter bottom area down here. So there's going to be a gradient from like darker at the top to lighter at the bottom. So I'm going to fill in this top area. I'm using like quite a lot of medium to do this. Again, if I'm doing it on my own, I'd probably just take the time and, just let the brush strokes kind of like take the time that they need. But since I'm live streaming, I'm just gonna expedite that with a bit of oil. Let's see. No One's Land Project says, what brushes do you prefer at this stage? Just big ones. I try not to get too hung up about, what what kind of brush. There's people that do a lot of cool stuff with flats. I tend to use filberts all the time. Not because I think that they're like the only brush you can use, but just they're the ones that happen to do most of the stuff that I want. And if they do that, then I'm kind of a happy guy. So yeah, that's what I tend to use. Just filberts, big ones, whenever possible. All right, let's call that background blocked in, even though it's a bit patchy. It's not the perfect background. But I am going to switch to some brushes that are a little bit smaller. So if I started out with this one here, I'm going to switch now to one that's slightly smaller than that. And I have been using one brush for this entire painting and just kind of wiping it off on a paper towel. Aljip asks, are you using turpentine? No, I'm definitely not using turpentine. I really try my best to keep toxic stuff out of my process wherever I can. The medium that I use is Liquin nowadays, which actually does contain, I think, a little bit of solvent. But the thing is, like, also it performs in a way that kind of nothing else does. So I'm disinclined to want to like use something else just because it's so darned effective. So now we can get into like some of the features of the face, right? Start to get into the eyes a little bit. Get into the lips, of course, like you saw me doing a little bit ago. But these are also going to be, you know, the most generic versions of these features that I can make. Everything that I'm doing, I'm trying to be generic. I'm trying to be simple with it. If I can stay simple, I take that as a win. And I try to kind of just stack those up until you have a good painting. That means you're always kind of painting the planes first. By the way, this brand new brush is not agreeing with me. It's a bit too kind of stiff. But I'm not going to blame my materials. I'm just going to get on with it. See if I can make it work. David Thompson says, just wanted to take this opportunity to say what a good teacher you are. You have just the right combination of intellectual analysis and intuition to make these understandable. David, thank you, bud. Really appreciate that. Everybody, you know, encouragement is, you know, compliments are fuel. And, you know, I appreciate them wherever I can get them. So thanks a lot. And yeah, back to this brush that I really am not liking. It's kind of leaving these little kind of streaky marks behind that I'm not a fan of right now, but I'm just going to get on with it and get over it. I think I need maybe some darker values in this eye socket. And I don't actually trust this brush to do it. I'm going to get my round out and start to kind of communicate maybe some of the darks. I think it's a decent time now that the canvas is like totally blocked in to get some of those darker aspects represented. So I'm going to go through the features. By the way, this is hard. This is something I struggled with for years, but what I think you want to do is simply go through the features and sketch to the best of your ability what each feature looks like. So if you see a little dark ridge in between the upper eyelid and the brow ridge, sketch it in. I think a lot of times with oil paint, we default into this space where we're looking for a process-driven answer to a problem that I think is more of like just a drawing problem. You know, like how do you paint in the eye? Well, just start by doing the stuff that it kind of looks like. And then once you've done that, see where it leaves you. You know, it sounds kind of super simple, but, you know, on another level, I feel like sometimes the best solutions are that. They're just a simple thing. You know, you see what the eye kind of looks like, you think you have it in the right place, well, just try and paint it. Hey, maybe you nail it. Maybe, you know, you sketch in the eye and it looks exactly the way it's supposed to, but by kind of waiting and, you know, I'm going to block it in like this and then glaze with the over my impastas, do all this extra stuff. I think sometimes you kind of wind up going across the river to get a drink of water, and I'm not fond of that, as you can tell. Also, I think it's kind of nice that you can be maybe a little bit bold. You know, I talked earlier about using bold values, but none of that is a guarantee that you yourself will be bold. But I think that there's an extent to which just going for it, you know, is a good strategy as any. You know, once you've done the things that you know you can control, you know, then just taking a shot and seeing where it lands, I think is not bad. So Fasterbands says, I don't know how you actually get a linen for painting. Do you do it in the same way with oil paper, or is it already made in the store? There's a lot of ways to buy linen. You can buy it in rolls. You can buy it in pre-stretched canvases. I mean, you know, there's uncountable ways to acquire linen. I think if you're in Europe, just go to Jackson's Art and they have a huge linen section, which I am not affiliated with at all. So I'm just telling you that I think that's a decent place as any to get yours. William Bogart says, when does the subconscious kick in when you paint? When does it not? I think maybe a better question. I feel like I'm always operating on that subconscious level. You know, part of teaching is that you need to take that subconscious stuff and kind of bring it to a more conscious space, which is, I think, kind of hard to do. But that's the job, you know. Ideally, what happens for a student is that you learn all of this, you know, conceptual stuff. You learn all of this, you know, all of these principles and concepts and ideas so that you can just be the intuitive self that you are, you know. I don't think you should always paint like an academic. That's not maybe my advice for any student. I think, though, that being an academic is a great way to discover the boundaries of your chosen field, and to know maybe what is knowable about that process. So, you know, I believe a lot in that academic tradition and how that can be a great fuel for an artist starting out. But it's all in service of training that subconscious to do the real work. You know, I think right now I'm responding to years and years and years of anatomical training, structural studies, all the things that I'm doing. Painting these features are just that. They're a manifestation of all of that effort and work. Dibiendu says, can you explain, is there any advantage of tone paper or canvas over white paper or canvas? Nah, not really. I mean, if you want to work with white chalk, then tone paper is good. If you want to, I mean, just like, it's just, what do you want to do? Like, if there's some things that you want to do, then yeah, naturally there will be some advantage. On a tone canvas, I think it makes it a little bit easier, especially when you're a student, to kind of judge values. When you put any value onto a white canvas, it kind of seems quite dark. So students will have a hard time at first kind of judging the values that they put down on the canvas. Once you cover the canvas, though, that problem kind of goes away. So it's It's not like really a long-term argument that like, oh, you always need to work on this kind of canvas or something. Now, I've gone into a couple of the features and defined them a little bit. Let's get into the nose, and you'll see why it's great to have blocked it in with a kind of mid-tone value. Eventually, the nostrils and the cast shadows from the nose are going to be a little bit darker than the form shadows on the nose. And blocking it in as a mid-tone allows you that space to add in the darker values, cast shadows, and ambient occlusions, and leave room for the form to show. If I block that nose in too dark, I'd be having a considerably more difficult time doing this right now. I do need another brush though, and I'm going to go to kind of a smaller brush a bit. I'm just kind of choosing it because it's worn in, because that other brush that was not worn in betrayed me a little bit. So I need to resort to this one to get the job done. And I'm just kind of painting in the shapes as they occur to me. You know, so not trying to overanalyze the areas of value that I'm encountering, just kind of painting it like I see it, trying to let the brush do the talking, not kind of overanalyzing or kind of overdoing anything. And you can see how, you know, you get a rough likeness by doing that. I haven't got into the highlights yet, partly because I want to spend some time working in the lighter midtones. I haven't really addressed them very much. I've been just kind of blocking in these features a bit, but there's a lot of, quite a bit of lighter midtone work that can be done through here. You know, kind of blocking in these other planes of the face. Vincent, after 2 years of learning drawing and painting on my own for 8 hours daily, I started to achieve nice results. I actually sold some paintings for 1K plus for people online. Your way of teaching is the best. Hey, Vincent, congrats, bud. I think that's really great. I've had, frankly, a lot of students go on and, you know, I don't know proportionally percentage-wise, but go on and, you know, start working in the field. Like, several, I would say that is now their primary job. But the difference is always the people that are like willing to, you know, stand-up comedy. I think it's kind of brilliant. I think it's so amazing. Stand-up comics, that capacity to like conjure laughter from people is like such absolute magic. But comedians are always talking about that kind of walk up to the microphone, you know? From backstage, you walk across the empty stage up to the microphone and you start telling your jokes. But that walk is a massive divider of fortunes. If you can't muster up the guts to go through that walk, you'll never get your comedy out there. You'll never tell your first joke. And I feel like with painting, the separation, obviously, I mean, get good at painting. If you don't get good at painting, you know, I don't know really what you'll do as a professional. But after that, it's the audacity to go out there and do your thing, right? To say like, this is an important thing and I want the world to see it. You know, that takes guts. And I really, you know, I admire people that do it. I work hard to maintain the belief to do it myself. And yeah, I just think if you're able to muster the guts to do that, I think power to you. Yeah, that's great, Vincent. Vincent asks also, is it possible to get your critique? Do you do that on Patreon? Everything I sold went to the US and I have a hard time with finding any representation of clients in the EU. I do one-on-ones on Patreon for now, although that could change in the future to something else. But for now, I do, and then it's available sometimes, but it requires another person to kind of drop out to do it. But that's not fun live stream talk. That's just logistic stuff. Let's see. Ruben Plamenov says, any new interesting materials you've recently tried? Interesting materials I've been trying lately. Let me get back to you on that, Ruben, because inevitably there are. I just can't think of them right now. Vacant Draw says, hi, good evening, good morning. How was your day? Day was pretty cool. I've been driving lately because I got my driver's license, and so at 44 now, I can drive. Dropped my wife off at the train station to go into Oslo. There was a sort of opening that one of her friends is having in Oslo, a group show. So she wanted to go there and kind of be supportive of that. So I went and dropped her at the train station. Felt like a very good husband. And a human that can drive, so that was all right. By the way, I'm getting into some of the darker midtones now, which is kind of what you want to be doing in this phase. Even still, like before you get into doing too much to the features, like I haven't really gone over the features again to kind of get subtle. But eventually, you need dark halftones to kind of make your picture work, and I think this is the stage for blocking those in. Also, to the point of our stream here, which is how to paint faster, this is the stage that I would prescribe that you work on them. Because if you don't, you're going to have fully realized features that are not really on a round head yet. That egg shape that we started with isn't yet fully realized as a volume, and we need to make that happen before we get into anything else, anything particularly serious here. So I'm working a lot on my dark halftones right now, and trying to give the head that sense of volume that it wants, so that if I manage to do anything remotely interesting with the features, that it will be happening on a head which is very distinctly round already. Where are we at questions-wise? Vacant Draw says, your teaching has a profound impact on my work and philosophy of art. Recently, using your teachings, I was able to create a tutorial on how to apply fundamentals of a sphere onto a portrait. That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, great. Hey, you know, it's not often, especially as an online teacher, you know, I know that everybody thinks, yeah, you get a bit of a following online and then your life's all gravy and everybody's nice to you. It's kind of hard actually being so remote from the people that you work with. You don't always get that feeling that people are kind of making progress, and then you can like see that progress and track that progress. So it's always really cool to hear when people have, watched a video of mine and like gone out and really kind of made something of it, used it in the way that it was designed, which is to try to help people figure something out. That's something that's really hard. Yeah, so very cool, man. Glad to hear it. My own Muse by Cat says, so what are your thoughts on likeness? Happy to watch you live streaming. I'm inspired to do block in now in sepia. We'll do it tonight. My thoughts on likeness are the same as they have kind of always been, which is a likeness is an outcome. A likeness is what a portrait aspires to. And so if we are creating a process for portraiture, it should revolve around arriving at a likeness. It is then my feeling that a likeness is very much the sort of meta purpose that we have here. It's not one thing, it's kind of many things, kind of wrapped together. And so with that in mind, I try to give myself the space to not worry too much about it, especially at the start. I think that there's levels to it. I think that you can have a block in that gives you a strong sense of likeness, yet doesn't look fully realized, I mean, like that isn't, a fully kind of detailed portrait. So I think it's complex, and I think that it should be focused on as such, like that it is a complex thing and not a kind of one note answer. There's no, I don't care how many YouTube videos say that there are. There is not like a silver bullet for likeness. I've been working in this space for like 20 years and I haven't seen it. So if it's that much of a secret, I don't think we're going to find it on YouTube. That's such a, I don't want to put the heater on like YouTubers talking about stuff like that, but I just think sometimes I think it's kind of silly. We all know what clickbait is. So the secret to likeness that isn't even hard. It isn't even that hard. The one-step secret to likeness that you can do every time without any effort or talent. It's like, that's not going to happen. You're just going to have to work really hard to make something decent. And if you practice, and I think really that's the thing, right? Like if what's on offer is, how do you practice for it? That's a good question, and I think that's where, things that I like to focus on, like, for example, this. Why is blocking in fast? Why do I care? Like, does it matter if you block in fast, if we all arrive there? Blocking in fast means that you get a result fast, which means you get to repeat that result over and over and over again, more times than if you block in really slow. So I do think that blocking in fast, in and of itself, actually has a value. So that is why I bothered to talk about it in the first place, is that I think if you block in fast, you'll be able to make repetitions fast, and that ultimately will serve you really well as you're attempting to get good at portraiture. A little highlight on the nose does everything, doesn't it? That's too cheap. That's a bit of a cheap highlight on the nose. Yeah, that's a bit too effective, isn't it? Yeah. But I want to get into my highlights a bit now, because I think it's time for them. The face isn't like kind of fully developed, but I think waiting like your last moment for your highlights is also it's not the most like clever thing you can do either, because highlights in themselves can be also kind of useful. As you can see with the one in the nose, they kind of immediately make stuff look quite round, and so getting them in can be really helpful. Okay. Wow, it is already like almost an hour and a half in. I can't believe that. That's crazy. Okay. Faster Pen says, I have a hard time drawing small size faces like on A4 paper. Yeah, I mean, there is a size issue. Like if you like paint really small, I can have a hard time painting really small too. I think that some of it's like practice. I have a student, for example, she's a great tattoo artist, and she also does portraits on pennies. I think her IG handle is like Brie Marie Arts. But that's, I think, where you'll find most of her tattoo stuff. But the point is, like, there's not really a size constraint to like what's possible. It's just kind of a matter of what you practice. And you can find like, yeah, maybe there's, ways of painting that maybe they are like actually more difficult for you. Like maybe, like maybe you're just not particularly good at that. I do kind of feel like anything with practice will go though, I feel like if you practice well, eventually you'll achieve that thing that you're looking for. William Bogart says, does the subconscious paint when you have mastered all the tools and fundamentals and let your painting flow? Just like driving a car, in the beginning we pay attention, we play the music, pay attention, now we play music, text, and even makeup. That's fair. Yeah, no, this is a fair point. I think that's the ideal case. I'm a big believer in this, that actually not all good things in painting are what I would say is like kind of explainable. By that I mean there's not always a reason for every good thing that you do. Sometimes you just think this just kind of needs to happen and you should just go with that, rather than saying, oh, well, if I follow the rules of composition and I do this and everything, if I do everything by the book, then, like I'll arrive at a good painting. Well, I mean, yes and no. I mean, following some rules is like a good thing. There's some immutable facts of painting, like that you should know. But in the end, if you find a good artistic reason to do something different, then yeah, you should do that. And I think that's going to come from a pretty unconscious place. So yeah, I'm definitely a believer in kind of at a certain point, kind of following your gut with this stuff, if you don't learn to trust that, I feel like you'll miss out on a lot of really cool, expressive opportunities as an artist. Emma Redeva says, as a result of studying art, my mind became rigid. I see a nice scene outside that I'd like to draw. My first thought is, what's the darkest dark? Did you struggle with that over-analysis as a student? Totally. Completely. Yes. That was a big part of my problem. I think the thing to remember about it, though, is that it's not as much as, maybe this is like a bit of a hard truth thing, but it's not the training's problem. And this sounds like I'm being like really mean. I don't mean to be. And I say this because I know exactly what you're talking about, because I did it. And I realized at a certain point, it wasn't the training that was causing me not to be able to kind of work right. It was just my own particular mentality and my own challenges within that training. Like everybody has like a different version of that particular difficulty. There's people that like, at the academy, they zoom ahead, right? Like they, in the first term, they're like, doing these amazing drawings and stuff. They sometimes face a challenge further down the road that it's like they're really, really great at the start, but like then when it comes to needing to really hunker down and like solve a problem, if it doesn't come to them quite naturally or quite intuitively, they can struggle. It's not a guarantee, or not to say like everybody should struggle or whatever, but I'm just saying it can happen. And we all have kind of aptitudes and difficulties in different places, and this is just yours, just like it was mine. That's where I had to really settle in and figure out, how I could loosen up, how I could sort of understand and express like the spirit of the law. Like that was a big thing for me, was understanding that it wasn't like learning to paint wasn't about absolutes. It was more about, getting the feeling right. So you follow the rules so that you can get to a place where, yeah, like the effect is arriving. And that's not always like the super kind of accountable thing. And that's okay. It doesn't have to be. So I would always look for like, what was the most explainable, the most repeatable. And that's like fine up to a point. But in the end, I don't like look to my favorite music and go, that sounds totally rational and repeatable. I think like, wow, that music's got a vibe, and I'm like into that vibe. And I think art is a little bit like that, where it's like, yeah, you just want to like get that vibe. You want to catch that feeling, and you want to like communicate that feeling to people. And all while, by the way, I understand that I use the word like as a conjoiner a lot. I'm sorry, everybody. I'm human, and it's really annoying for everybody to hear, I'm sure. But I can't do anything about it. It's like breathing for me. William Bugart says, congrats on your new Salem picture. Beautiful piece you did. Hey, thank you for that, William. He's referring to, there's a painting competition in New Salem that I entered a painting into. It's a very creative painting. It's a very personal painting. And I am setting it out into the world to try to let people in, let people understand what my artistic vision is. And it's really hard. Let's be real. the more you care about something, I think the harder it is to share it. And I'm no exception in that. Like this painting that I put into this competition is like this really kind of personal thing, and it was a struggle to make it, and a struggle to share it. Everything about it was a struggle. But like I think that's what happens when you care. That's what happens when stuff matters to you, is that it's hard to share. So I'm like, I've totally got my defenses up. You know, I'm totally ready for everybody to hate it, and that's fine. But ultimately, like, you got to put it out there into the world, because that's why you made it. Let's see. Stuart Hambley says, I notice you are mixing in a single spot, and that is that your normal process, or do you, for example, mix a string of values? Yeah, for live streams and a lot of painting lessons, I tend to mix this way, where I just use this kind of pool of value in this case, or color in other cases. Whereas, like if I'm painting a picture myself, yeah, usually I'll mix out kind of a string of color values. This is just kind of born a little bit out of necessity, being able to kind of rapidly block something in, rapidly paint and demonstrate. Just helps me to do that when I have a kind of fluid palette to work with. Right. So we're at a place where I would say that we almost kind of have a likeness. I mean, I don't think we're necessarily far off from a decent study of values here. It's not full on a painting yet, but we'll see how far I get in the time that we have. I think I'm going to try and give this another half hour and see where I arrive at. Let's see. Rick Urbanowski says, I can do a critique right now and it's free. Not sure what you're referring to there, Rick, but if you want to critique the painting, you can go for it. Hymonks Fine Art says, do you prefer art books? If yes, please recommend any. Yeah, well, I love art books. What artist doesn't like art books, I think we all kind of grow up loving art books and loving everything to do with that. So, yeah, I'm no different in that respect. Let's see. Wait, I lost my train of thought painting-wise. I want to get to a better key here. I want to get my darks kind of locked in. So more than anything, I tend to wait with my darks mostly. The highlights probably going a little bit earlier, as you saw. But I'll wait with my darks to kind of get to a place where I feel I've blocked a lot of the picture in, and then I'll kind of give myself the permission to the space to really lock in the darks. And that tends to kind of open up the picture a little bit. Like you start to feel like it's sort of light and airy once you get the rest of those kind of really dark values blocked in. Like I said, these dark values behind the face here, like this hair, I'm going to let that be a little bit darker than the values within the face, or within the side of the cheek. So that kind of acts as a frame a little bit around the cheekbone here. Let's see. I probably have a little bit too much light value through there. Stuart Hamby says, by the way, I appreciate all your content that I've seen. You have a great way of teaching and you produce beautiful work. Thank you so much. Vacant Draw says, I always bug you on IG about random questions, and your book has been amazing. Feels like a one-stop one-stop all for everything. Yeah, appreciate it. The book is, the book was great. I'm really happy in the end with where it arrived, where I was able to get to, and yeah, I think it is a valuable thing for people in this field, in this endeavor to have, and I'm really proud of it. So glad you got a copy. Let's see, I want to get into some of these like darker spots in the hair a bit. Because it is these like darker spots that actually give the hair like that sense of volume. So when it's kind of coming into here and like coming into this central area. And hair is so kind of vibes based. You know, like it's just, you just have to kind of like mess around with it until like you feel like it arrives. You know, I think even in my book, actually, I was talking about this, and it's like hair is like painting the waves. You know, you have to just kind of go with the flow a bit. You know, find a cool solution and just kind of run with it. I think there's almost like a lost edge back here. I like that idea that you kind of lose an edge like that. Madeline says, will you be doing more workshops in Europe this year apart from Rome? Madeline, that's a cool question. Madeline, that is a cool question. Let me tell you guys a story. Let me tell you about something. Here's a thing that could happen. So I was interviewing for the podcast, the Idiosyncratic Nightmare podcast. If you're not subscribed, it is a YouTube show. Look for Idiosyncratic Podcast, Idiosyncratic Nightmare Podcast. You'll find it. I was interviewing a really great sculptor called Audal de Juana, and a project that he brought up that I am really warming to. He's a Catalonian sculptor, so this would take place in Barcelona or outside Barcelona. But he had this idea for a workshop called Don't Create Alone. Meaning that, you know, so much of what we do is we try to make these artworks, and we do so in this isolation. And it's really hard to get a sense of what it means to like really be creative and like make something really cool. Now, the thing about Audal is that always, even when he was a student, he always had such a strong sense of, by the way, I've messed something up here. I've totally miskeyed a couple things. I miskeyed the edge of the nose here, making it too dark. And then I keyed wrong this section of the cheek that's right next to it. And it's such a bad problem. It creates so many issues that you just have to go in and fix it immediately. So it's really distracting. As soon as I noticed it, I thought, oh my goodness, what have you done? Now, the thing is, if you overdo that nasolabial fold, you create a different set of problems for yourself. But underdoing it is the kind of same issue, like, or same but different, right? So sorry, I just needed to get to that. Even when he was like doing his first project as a sculpture student in Florence, like he was invested, like he wanted to make it beautiful. And we're all like that. And academies try to stamp that out of you as well, because it's like, it's really ineffective when you're trying to like just learn a thing to also be trying to make this beautiful expressive thing, because the beautiful expressive part of painting is something that's difficult to capture. It goes away. It, you know, if you overdo it, it becomes a caricature. You know, there's so many challenges that you create for yourself when you try to really make something artistic and expressive, that for academics, you know, and students trying to make progress, it's usually not the best way to do it. But it is kind of the thing that we also all want to do. So Audal's idea is to kind of try to combine a little bit of this, wherein you'll be able to work and also like work on making something beautiful. And that's what Aldal and I would be doing. It's like we'd be working with a model and making artwork that we really believed in, and sharing that process, and working with students who are working with the model as well. So I think that's a kind of cool idea for a workshop that I can get on board with. We don't have the date set for that, but I think that's the next immediate opportunity that I'm working on to do a workshop in Europe. Dibyendu says, "Thank you so much for this session. I've generally learned a lot from your YouTube content and free live stream. Going as soon as possible to your Patreon. Much love and respect." Thank you. Patreon is a great platform. It's allowed me to do so much, really, and I'm endlessly appreciative to them for all the tools that they make for creators. And for everybody that subscribes. Oh my goodness. Just helps me make better and better and better content all the time. So it's just really been a phenomenal blessing. Right. Brie Marie Arts, yeah. Met them last fall. Very rad artist, Aaron Schmidt says. Ruben Plamanov says, "How to draw a big curly hair that's in shadow in a cool way. Found it really tough." Yeah, the advices about it are, it's really hard. The only demo I've done like that is years ago. This is like really early Patreon stuff. I did a demo of drawing in sepia chalk. And I was drawing a model who was a student of ours, Cornelia and I's, at the Academy. And she had this really big, curly red hair. And I was drawing it in this sepia chalk. And I think that's probably like the best version I think I've ever done of hair like that. I don't usually, just by coincidence, I don't usually work with models that have hair like that. So it doesn't come up very much. But that lesson was really fun to make, and it's still on my Patreon. You can still find it if you look for drawing in sepia chalk, if that's something you're like really, really interested in right now. But like how to do it? There's no how. You just gotta vibe. You just gotta, go with it. Don't fight it. You gotta like go with the flow of it, Like it wants to be wild and it wants to be messy. And if you try and make it controlled, it's going to look boring. So my advice is to vibe out. Get out there and like make it exciting, draw shapes that you think might suck. I saw this great thing. I subscribed to this newsletter from an artist called Jeremy Mann. You probably know him from like cityscape paintings. But he writes this totally crazy newsletter, which is kind of like what I've based my newsletter on, which is like he just thinks about stuff, and then he just like writes about it. It's just whatever's on his mind, like he thought about a thing, it's in the newsletter, and I love that. And like I said, I've decided that that's my newsletter content now. Is all I want to do is just write about the things that I think and like let people know what that is. But he had this great picture of a Post-it note. And it said, "It's not stupid." Next line. "You're just afraid." And I thought, oh my God. That's like one of the deepest things I've ever heard. And it's like, it's so true. This painting that Willem was talking about that I entered into New Salem. And like all the paintings that I'm doing right now, there's a point at which I fundamentally think, this is a stupid idea. And then immediately after that, I think that doesn't matter. What matters is that you believe in it. And so to the point of this Post-it note, it's not stupid, you're just afraid. That's what we do. That's what we do when we're fearful that we will be rejected or that people won't understand it or people won't like it. we hedge and we say, oh no, it's just a stupid idea. I shouldn't bother with it or whatever. Just in so many phases of our life, and that thought that it's not stupid, you're just afraid, was like so liberating. I thought, what a genius idea. Yeah, so that's my big share for you guys. Jeremy Mann, and that post-it note really unlocked something for me today. Let's see. Clarissa Banez says, how long is the ideal block-in session? I find myself painting too slow and trying to perfect the block-in. I had about this size, give yourself 2 hours. Any more, and you're just like faffing around. Any less than that, and I feel you're probably underdoing it. This would be a painting session that, like, let's say that at the end of this, I think, oh, this is decent. I would take hopefully like one more session and try to finish this painting in a grisaille. Of course, like if you're painting in color, probably another stage could be involved. But ideally, I try to take my purely observational paintings and do them in just about maybe 2 sessions for a grisaille, 3 for color. Evercolda says, why sometimes loose sketches get more attention than detailed paintings? It's the truth. It is the hardcore truth. I think what you're talking about here is on how on social media you can put your life into a painting, and you can put your heart and your feelings and your creativity and your thought and your time and all the pressure and just sweat and tears. And then you can post like a little sketch that you did in 15 minutes, and the sketch will inevitably like get more play on social media than this painting that you spent forever working on. This is a phenomenon that we all experience. Like, it's such a cliche. And as to why it happens, I think that has more to do with the platform than it has to do with the art. Think about how people look at things on Instagram and what they can digest. They can't digest your life's work on Instagram. That's not what it's there for. It's there for like most people go on Instagram to like have a laugh or like pass a moment, where they're like waiting for the bus or whatever. They're not there to like absorb deep paintings, as much as I would love for them to be. They're not. So just try not to take it personal, and if anything, if you're looking for like growth strategy and you're working on building your audience, well, don't build it with work that takes forever to do, because people just don't have time or interest in that on Instagram. Yeah, it's not you. Allow me to tell you that. Arash Fati says, are you going to glaze it after this? Is it going to be alla prima to the end? I won't glaze it. No glazes. Not on this one. Emma Redeva says, apart from value, what differences do you find between graphite and colored pencil? Does your workflow or aim change? I think every time that I use a different material, my workflow and aim changes. I find that colored pencils have such a limited value range that it's really difficult to consider doing anything like super value based with them. Like it's just that is like cutting against the grain for sure. So I try not to do that. Yeah. Yeah, so really light values and kind of line work, I think, is probably the most appropriate thing with colored pencils. At least that's the sense that I get. I'm not a colored pencil master, as many of you will well know. But if I did have to use it, or if I do ever use it, that's what I go for. By the way, I've been neglecting a little bit this mouth. Why don't we put those highlights in and just see where that takes us? Usually somewhere absolutely dangerous. Yeah, that was awful. Blah. Terrible. What am I doing over here? Whoa, that might be like the worst lip highlight I've ever painted in my entire life. People, write down this day. Document this experience. That is the worst lip highlight I think I've ever painted. Wow. Let's see if we can recover from that. Oof. So bad. Yeah, that's dreadful. Oh my goodness. I wonder if I'm just making it worse. Why is it so bad? I think it's like maybe a little bit too light and the area around the lips is like too dark. Terrible. Sorry, I gotta I'm flummoxed. I need to adjust to this new reality where these lips look horrible. Let's see. Nathan Elwood says, I didn't know there was a stream. I'm so late. Don't worry, you can watch it later. My Amused by Cat says, where can we see the painting? Sorry, I've been missing out. I think that right now the painting. All right, so here's something. Here's a thing that's happening. I'll put this in my newsletter eventually, and I'll announce it on Patreon and stuff. But so I made a website to kind of sell my work maybe last year because I make lots of work all the time, and I don't necessarily love the whole gallery model. So I thought, well, I should sell my work. It's what artists do. And so I made this site, and I did a studio sale, and that was fine. It was really successful. I was really happy. But I had said always that, I make a lot of sketches, like this sketch, for example, right? I'll finish this up, and it'll be a nice little painting. It doesn't require a lot of conceptual background. You know why I paint portraits and what they mean to me and what they are. But then there are paintings like these big, elaborate paintings that you spend, sometimes years thinking about and planning. And I always find that they're so flat online. And I hate that. I hate that, like, these things that really matter so much to us don't have a place to, like, let people experience them. So I thought, well, what if I made a website where, I could write a story, I could put detailed images, I could make a video about the making of this thing, and I could kind of open the doors of the studios so that people could get a feeling for what this work was actually like and what it meant to me, and get some sense of the context of it. So I've just recently put together those web pages. So like they're individual dedicated web pages to those artworks that I've made, and eventually I'll share that with the public. Now, like, on one level, yeah, like, technically speaking, you'd be able to purchase the work through that site. That's not the point. I'm not doing it because I don't actually think that people buy work like that online necessarily. I think they buy it more in person. I'm just making it available because it'd be kind of useless not to do that. But really, the website is there for the story, and being able to share that story and let people kind of connect to what I think is really important to me. Like, if you think about your own work and, like, what about your work is important and why do you care about it? That's what these paintings are, and those are the stories I want to tell. So eventually, like I said, that'll be I'll put that out. But I think right now, if you wanted to see it today, probably the best thing to do is go to the New Salem Museum website, and I think they have a list of finalists for that exhibition posted. Let's see. Yeah, a lot of questions coming in. Hey, T. Merck says, I literally just bought your book. That's awesome. See, there's a lot of questions, and we're coming up towards the end. Let me see if I can, like, rattle through a bunch of them. Rick Urbanowski says, is it possible to discuss your thoughts on palette mixing while you're doing it? Thoughts on palette mixing. I think of palette mixing more as like when you're mixing with a palette knife rather than what I'm doing now, which is just kind of freestyling a bit with my brush. I call this kind of brush mixing, which is that in general, I think brush mixing is not advisable unless you're kind of doing a one session painting like this kind of is. Excuse me. Or alternatively, that you feel like you have a really good control over value and color. Otherwise, you risk to get really quite muddy quite fast, which is not an ideal place to find yourself. Yeah, for students, too much brush mixing can be a little bit too edgy. I think, I'm a big believer in kind of learning to do it a bit the hard way, and then when you get a bit of experience, going slightly easier. Yeah. Let's see. Eli Art says, I love his approach to newsletters. Jeremy Man is so cool. Eli, I think this is Elijah Schneider. I think this is my video editor. Elijah's a fantastic video editor and a great urban sketcher. I think you can find him I think he's on TikTok at, I think it's like Eli Schneider Arts, something like that. But yeah, really cool guy. Virat says, a new song like Hanuman Kind Run It Up has been released. Okay. Phone Goyen says, I have 2 reds, yellow, blue, and a transparent and semi-transparent in my palette. Is it okay to use just white opaque? Yeah, that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. Let's see. Nathan Elbert says, I'm learning with pencil at the moment. When I feel ready, would you go straight to oils, if that's the goal medium, or try acrylic watercolor first? Don't worry about acrylic watercolor, man. Just go to oils. It's hard enough to do oil painting well. Acrylic and watercolor, like, they're just totally different mediums that operate totally different procedurally. Oil, by the way, let's talk about oil paint for a second. Oil paint's wild. Like, it's not easy to get along with. So I feel like the sooner you start getting along with oil, the easier it's going to be for you to start to implement some like fundamentals ideas. In fact, Harold Speed always said in his great books on drawing and painting that you should be studying oil paint alongside studying drawing. I mean, the notion in most academies is that you study drawing before you study painting, just to clarify. But that the idea is that by the time you actually start studying oil painting, or making paintings for which the result matters, you need to know just how oil paint works in general. Like, if you don't know that yet, it's going to be a very very harsh kind of wake-up call when you start working in oil. So I think the earlier the better. You can start messing around with it, start doing bad sketches. Take this YouTube lesson, for example, right? And I mean, just repeat this 5, 6, 7 times with different source photographs. The whole idea with oil is that there's a range of things that you need to know that you can only know through experience. How much medium is the right amount of medium? I can tell you that, but it's not really valuable unless you can experience it, Like, I could say, oh, use just the right amount that does X, but it doesn't translate. It's an experience-based lesson. So look for good people that will give you good information, but then eventually that information needs to become knowledge through experience. Unfortunately, there's no time too early, I think, to start messing with oil paint if that's eventually where you want to go. Rob says, painting should be done for oneself, so not posting on social media would be healthier for the mind as we seek constant outer validation subconsciously. Yeah, well, you're not wrong. I would add a caveat to that, though, that it's a professional consideration. If you want to make it in this industry, you should learn how to interface with social media in such a way that it does not govern what you do. I think that the very difficult thing It's like, in some ways, I think it's kind of easy to say, don't post on social media. Yeah, like, okay, you avoid all the problems, but you're throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Like, so much of the good things that have come to me in my career have come to me because of social media. So taking all that away, I'd be working some job and I wouldn't be nearly painting as much as I do because I wouldn't have the time. So rather than saying like don't post on social media, I think how do you deal with the conundrum mentally of like how to manage your expectations? To me, I think of social media very much as a data collection exercise. I'm trying to find out what people respond to. I post content. Sometimes people respond to it very well. Sometimes what I think will be the most popular thing is not at all. That's fine. Now I've learned something. And it's not like this is my own way of just coping with, to your point, Rob, what's really difficult, which is People, my absolute apologies. It's not funny, Nathan Elworth. I think that's as good a place as any to end the stream. 10, 15 minutes of me talking into silence is probably just fine. Um, Listen, I was making some great points, really amazing, excellent points. But let's call that a stream, guys, and I'll see you on the next one. Thank you so much. All right. Cheers.